Ronin is a warrior who's about to be defeated by an army of giants, but he is unexpectedly sent back to the past and given another chance to fix his mistakes and get stronger. A man is wearily sitting in a battlefield littered with corpses. He slowly sighs and mutters that all these people have been killed in just about every way imaginable. He admits this was a clear oversight on his part, and suddenly realizes the being he's sitting on is alive. He says he did not expect a human to be so powerful, so the man angrily asks if it's still breathing. It's revealed that Ahayute, the giant, is the last of the three giants. They suddenly appeared in the Empire 20 days ago and began wreaking havoc for no apparent reason. The man angrily tells Ahayute half of their empire is in ruins because of him, so what right does he have to still be alive? Ahayute tells him to fear not because the time is nigh, and he will soon return to the embrace of his creator. The man hopes his dead friends are there waiting for him. Ahayute doesn't understand what he means by friends, so the man says he's talking about the other two who came here with him. One of them was roasted like a slab of meat by the mighty red dragon, and the other was sealed away forever by old man Lorhan. He asks if he gets it now, so Ahayute tells him to not delude himself by concealing the truth. As children of the stars, they share their senses with one another, and he is well aware that those who fought them died in battle as well, so he asks the man if he understands the significance of this. It means there are no more warriors such as himself here to defend this land. The man reminds him that he's still standing, but Ahayute tells him to not be ignorant because his team has also almost reached its end. He says he is quite relieved in a sense because if the man had discovered his talent and begun training sooner, he might have been a serious obstacle in their path. The man sees that he's just trying to piss him off and says his life has already been shitty enough without this latest disaster, so Ahayute should just shut up and die already. Ahayute says he is a remarkable human and he admires him. However, there is no hope for his world, and it is doomed to be consumed. Before he can finish his sentence, the man swiftly cuts off his head, killing him. He mutters that what's done is done, and he can't change anything. He wearily walks forward and sees the corpses of his friends lying on the ground. He sees that they're all here together and questions why they got like this, killed like this, and asks why they couldn't have just swallowed their pride. He wonders if they thought they were as strong as him and says they should have ran away while they had the chance. He mutters that they were all stubborn right until the end and says he doesn't understand. These giants repelled even the aura of the greatest swordsman in the Empire, so why did only his sword work against them? He admits that if it wasn't for him, the penal soldiers wouldn't have had to lead the charge and he wouldn't have been the first to die. He wearily sighs and admits he just doesn't get it, but he suddenly hears a voice asking if anyone's there. Shocked, he hurriedly opens his eyes and recognizes the voice as the person says they're injured and can't move. The man realizes she's alive and tiredly gets up as the voice continues asking for someone. He wearily walks forward with the support of his sword. He happily sees that Adashan, the Grand Marshal, is alive, but sees that she's lost an arm. He asks what in the world happened to her since she looks incredible, so she tells the man, Ronin, that he doesn't look so good either. More importantly, she asks about Ahayute and if he's dead, so Ronin confirms that he killed him and the body isn't far from here. Adashan smilingly sees that he's finally dead and thanks Ronin, so he asks if she can do him a favor since she really wants to thank him. He asks if she can make sure the penal soldiers receive a proper burial, since he knows their bodies are usually either abandoned or incinerated. But they played an important part in this victory. Adashan mutters that she's not sure if she'll make it back alive, so he might have to bury them himself. Ronin tells her to not talk like that and suddenly coughs up blood. He tells her to take a look at this and asks if she really thinks he'll outlive him when he's practically dying already. He mutters that there are so many things he never had the time to do, and now that death is just around the corner, he's kind of sad to go. Adashan asks if there's anything he'd like to do if he could survive, so he cheerily says there's a whole bunch of things he wants to do, but one thing in particular comes to mind right now. He wishes he could have studied at an academy, partly because of the damn giant's nonsense just now, but there's another reason. When she was alive, his sister's greatest wish was to send him to an academy, although it looks like they'll be having a family reunion soon enough. Adashan says once the rain stops, the search party will come looking for survives, but he tells her to stop it since he's already a goner. He tells her to not give him false hope, but it suddenly stops raining, shocking them. They suddenly hear some rumbling and Ronin questions what's going on. A massive being with 8 wings suddenly appears in the sky along with an army of giants, so Ronin angrily asks who the hell they are and where they came from. Adashan mutters that maybe those giants were only the beginning and says this was her 3rd chance, but she failed yet again, so she doesn't see how her last chance could possibly be different. As she's about to fall unconscious, she suddenly hears Ronin's voice as he asks what she's doing and tells her to snap out of it. He orders her to hurry up and use telekinesis or something to send him up there since he can't reach them with his sword from down here. Adeshan doesn't understand, so he asks if they aren't going to kill those things. She questions if he still wants to keep fighting, so Ronan says he obviously does and asks if she'd rather sit back and wait for them to kill her. He brandishes his sword, declaring that if he's going to die anyway, he's taking at least a few of these things with him. Adeshan is shocked to see that he still won't give up despite all the odds stacked against him. She realizes that's the kind of person he is, and that determination is what brought him this far. So perhaps there might be hope for him. Adeshan grabs Ronan's shoulder, so he asks what it is now and tells her to stop interrupting because he's busy, but she suddenly kisses him. Caught off guard, Ronan wonders what's going on, but Adeshan slides a small marble into his mouth. He hurriedly asks what she just stuck in his mouth, so she whispers something in his ear. Confused, Ronan asks what she's taking about, but she whispers something else unintelligible. Ronan hurriedly says there's no time for this nonsense, but she says if he runs into him again, he should tell her to stick to being a tailor instead of wasting her time. As the giants get ready, Adeshan says she's tried everything she could think of, but nothing worked the way she hoped it would. A giant explosion goes off behind them and Ronan suddenly wakes up in a clear field, calling out Adeshan's name. Shocked, he questions how this can be possible and wonders if this is his hometown, Nimberton, and if he really traveled back in time. Ronan says he can't believe the Grand Marshal was telling the truth and remembers how she told him that what he swallowed just now was the orb of time, and it's the secret to how a mere seamstress like her was able to rise to the position of Grand Marshal, because the orb allows her to go back in time up to 4 times. However, she's already used up 3 of her chances, and there's only 1 left, so she decided to give him the chance. He has the power to slay the giants, and might very well be the key to stopping the end of their world. She leans towards and says he'll need to hone his abilities much more in order to do so, but thankfully, he seems to be more than ambitious enough. Ronan hurriedly says he was just thinking out loud, but she tells him to go to the Filian Academy if he's eager to learn, since there are many outstanding warriors there, and she's sure they can help him. She tells him to stop her from becoming a warrior in the next world, because she's tried everything she could think of, but nothing worked the way she hoped it would. Presently, Ronan frustratingly questions if this is really happening and asks someone to wake him up if he's dreaming. He angrily asks how she can just send him back in time all of a sudden, and wonders what he's supposed to do all by himself. However, he suddenly realizes that being back in time means he has another chance to save his sister. Ronan quickly runs through the crowds in the town, remarking that if this really is the past, it should be just up ahead. He suddenly notices some guys bullying a kid and wonders what they're doing to the poor boy hanging from a tree. He sighs and says some people never change, but he suddenly realizes that kid isn't hanging from a rope. He's floating in the air with magic. He wonders what someone with talent like that is doing out in the middle of the countryside, since there was hardly anyone with that kind of magic power even in the army. He suddenly remembers that that guy was here in town at this point in time. The boy nervously wonders how much longer he has to hold him up in the air like this, since if the kid stays like that any longer, it could be dangerous for him. The kid asks the bullies to please make it stop and swears that he doesn't have any money since he spent everything he had on his mom's medicine this past month. However, the bully asks how that's his problem and tells him to just empty his pockets, asking if he looks like he cares about his mom. He starts slapping the boy and says if he really wants to be a good son, then he should make more money. He tells the boy with wind magic to lift the kid up to the top of the tree since this numbskull doesn't seem to understand yet. The boy hurriedly says he can't do that, and says he could drop him by accident. However, the bully tells him to not be such a baby and asks what he's so afraid of when he's not the one hanging up there. He angrily tells the boy, Asel, to shut his mouth and lift the boy up or he'll hang him up with him. Stunned, Asel wonders how he ended up doing this, and admits that he maybe should have never learned magic in the first place since all he wanted was to show that he's good at something. He decides to just tell the bully he can't do it, but nervously admits he's really scared to do that. Still, he says he has to tell him and asks them to stop this. However, Ronan suddenly smacks him on the head and says, that's enough since he's going to kill that poor kid. The kid hanging up in the air falls down, so the bully angrily asks Ronan what the hell he thinks he's doing. He asks Asel if he let the kid down just because that prick told him to, and asks if he looks like a pushover to him. Asel hurriedly says he didn't mean to do that, but Ronan tells him to forget about that loser since they need to talk. He says he has some questions for him as the bully angrily asks Ronan what the hell his problem is. First of all, Ronan asks Asel where he learnt telekinesis from, so he says he learned it on his own, from a magic book that he bought from a traveling merchant. Ronan is surprised to hear that he became this good at telekinesis with a cheap old magic book, and acknowledges that this is impressive, so he'll need to test it more. But this could be very useful against those giants. He hears the sound of a sword being drawn, and is surprised to see that the bully has a sword. The bully furiously asks Ronan how he dares to look down on him, and says he's lucky he let him off easy so many times before, but today, he's really going to make him pay for this. He rushes forward to attack, and Ronan sees that it's a real longsword, so he wonders a street thug got a sword like that. The bully's technique is terrible, but in the street world, it's enough just to be strong, although obviously not against him. Shocked, the bully wonders how Ronan can dodge his attacks so easily. Ronan remarks that he may have gone back, it looks like he still has his old skills. All that training he did as a penal soldier must be practically engraved in his bones at this point. And these are his combat instincts. The bully says he got lucky just now because he was going to cripple him so badly that he couldn't even lift a spoon for the rest of his life. Ronan agrees that he's right, and that was pretty lucky, so he wishes he had some of this luck before. The bully tells him to get on his knees and beg for forgiveness, then maybe he'll consider letting him go, although he'll have to give up an arm at least. Ronan fakes being scared, but he suddenly stops when the bully tells him to not worry, since if he ends up dead, he'll take really good care of his sister. Ronan asks if he just said his sister, so the bully laughingly says he wants to harass her every time he sees her around. However, Ronan instantly cuts off the bully's ear. Shocked, he falls to the ground and starts screaming in pain before Ronan steps towards him and angrily says he thinks he should cut his throat right here. The other bullies watch in shock and question how he just cut off the guy's ear with a tree branch. Ronan asks if they enjoyed the show and tells them to take this idiot and get out of here or they'll be next. Ronan tells them to not forget to leave the money they took and to make sure to throw in a little extra for pissing him off, so the bullies agree and say he can have the money. Ronan throws the pouch of money into the hands of the kid who was being bullied. Surprised, the guy asks Ronan if he's really giving this all to him since this is way more than they took from him. But Ronan says it's fine, and this is enough for him. He tells the boy to not worry about the bullies coming back to get revenge, since they won't hurt a fly from now on. The boy happily thanks him, but Ronan tells him to not mention it and just go home. Asel nervously steps towards them and apologizes to the boy. He tearfully says the bully, Hans, threatened to hurt him if he didn't help him, but he knows it was wrong of him to do that, and he was just so scared that he couldn't stop himself. He admits this is all his fault and deeply apologizes. However, the boy says he noticed Asel is always crying ever since Hans first started pushing him around, so when he saw him crying like that, he realized something. He's not the only one they're picking on. He's in the same boat as him, so he shouldn't be too hard on himself because it's not his fault. Still, he says he appreciates Asel's apology and leaves, so Ronan smilingly remarks that there might be hope for Asel after all. He reminds Asel that he said he needed to talk to him about something, and says he'll see him back here in 3 days. Surprised, Asel asks what he means. So Ronan says he's kind of busy right now, and he'll see him then, so they'll make it more romantic, and meet when the moon comes up. He threateningly says he's sure he doesn't need to tell him what will happen if he doesn't show up and dashes off, telling him to not be late as Asel is left wondering what that was all about. Ronan picks up some flowers but thinks they might be a bit much since he just remembered that his sister liked them, and picked a bunch on the way here. He admits this was a silly idea, and decides to get rid of them. But his sister suddenly comes outside, saying she was wondering who was on the door and didn't know it was him. Stunned, Ronan slowly turns around, remarking that while he was fighting as a penal soldier, he thought it over thousands of times. What's the first thing he would say to his sister if he ever saw her again? Should he apologize for leaving home without telling her, or should he tell her how much he missed her? He spent countless hours agonizing over this, but that was when he was Ronan, the penal soldier. So there's only one thing he can say to her now. She sees that he came home early today, and Ronan slowly confirms that he's back. Later, Ronan's sighter happily says she never thought she'd live to see this, and happily hugs the bouquet of flowers from her grumpy little brother. His sister Ariel says she's really happy, so Ronan mutters that he's glad she likes them. She asks if he has enough to eat and if he'd like some more stew, but Ronan says that was plenty. He asks how old she is this year, so she says he knows that she's 22 and questions why he's asking. So he says he just couldn't remember all of a sudden. Surprised, she asks how he could forget something like that as Ronan remarks that Ariel being 22 means that there's about 10 years left until those giants attack. Ariel checks his forehead and says she doesn't think he has a fever, as Ronan remarks that his sister is exactly the way he remembers her. She's still so bright, kind, and warm-hearted that he wishes this moment would last forever. However, in 10 years from now, he's going to have to protect this world and his sister. He tells Ariel he has something to tell her, so she asks what it is. He says he's thinking of entering an academy, which makes her excited. She tells him to say that again and asks if he really means it, so he says he does. She asks why he had the sudden change of heart, since he never wanted to hear about academies before. She happily says there's no time to lose and scurries away, saying she knew this day would come and Ronan is a natural-born genius, so he'd be good at anything. She suddenly sets down a cauldron in front of Ronan and says this is a surprise gift for him. Surprised, Ronan sees that the cauldron is filled with money and asks where she got this all from, so she says she's been saving up in secret to surprise him. Just in case he ever changed his mind, she wanted to be able to send him off to an academy right away. Ronan acknowledges that she's amazing and asks how in the world she managed to save up this much. He tells her he really appreciates this, but he'd rather her use the money herself since this, honestly, isn't nearly enough anyway. Surprised, Iriel asks what he's talking about and says it's a lot more than he thinks. She's not sure which academy he has in mind, but this should be enough. However, before she can finish, Ronan says he wants to attend the Philian Imperial Academy, shocking her. The Philian Imperial Academy, the leading educational institute ranked as the best in the empire. The academy boasts of the best teachers on the whole continent, as well as enormous funding from the imperial family, allowing it to provide top-quality education. The academy's reputation is so great that people even refer to it as a hero factory. Grand Marshal Adashan, Schlieffen the Swordmaster, the Winter Witch, a notorious villain, and so on. Philian's warriors definitely played a big part in the war, and he could understand right away what the Grand Marshal meant. The problem is that in order to study at the academy, you have to meet their impossibly high entrance standards and pay the astronomical tuition fees, but he still didn't expect his sister to react so positively. As he's walking, Ronan mutters that he'll just have to prove himself by getting into the academy and tells Asele he didn't think he'd actually show up here. Asele nervously reminds him that he said he'd make him regret if he didn't show up. So Ronan says they shouldn't get hung up on the past since they both have a very busy night ahead of them. He says he needs to test him, so Asele asks what he means. Ronan says it's nothing too serious, and tells him to use his telekinesis on him to lift him up as high as he can. Asele is surprised to hear that and asks why he should do that, since it seems dangerous. But Ronan doesn't agree and tells him to just do as he says for now. He tells him to not worry because it won't kill him, so Asele slowly agrees and uses Invisible Hand. Ronan is surprised to see that he's being raised into the air and inwardly acknowledges that Sel's magic is even stronger than he'd thought. He rises into the sky, remarking that it isn't quite stable or high enough yet, but this feels similar to when he fought the giants. It's just like the telekinesis spell that allowed him to fight Ahayute eye to eye way up in the air. This is what he was hoping for. He inwardly says mages are already hard enough to find, but telekinesis is a rare talent, even among them, so this is great news, which means Asele is going to be a crucial player in his future battle against the giants. He grins and says they're certainly off to a good start, as Asele wearily says he's starting to get tired. He asks if he can let Ronan down now, but Ronan tells him to hang in there a little longer since he just wants to check one more thing. Then he'll come down on his own. Surprised, Asele asks how he's going to do that and watches as Ronan unexpectedly cuts through his mana. Asele asks Ronan what he did just now, so he says that was no big deal, and is just a little trick he's always been able to do. Asele says he's never heard of anyone cutting through mana, but Ronan smacks him on the head and tells him to forget about it since he doesn't know how exactly he does it either. Remarking that finding out more about this ability is another one of his missions. This ability is probably the reason that his sword alone was able to cut that damn giant, but he can't worry about that later, and right now, there's more important business to take care of. He tells Asele he's passed the test. He tosses him a bag and tells him to come with him since they have work to do before the moon goes down. Asele argues that it's really dark right now, but Ronan says this is going to be the first chapter of the tale of Ronan that will go down in the Empire's great history forever. Asele is surprised to hear that Ronan wants to attend the Philian Academy. He asks if he's really saying they're going to the academy that accepts only the Empire's most elite warriors, and he's taking him with him. Ronan asks why he keeps on asking and says he's getting on his nerves. He asks Asele if he doesn't want to go, so Asele says that's not the issue here. Ronan is a gifted fighter, so he's sure he'll be fine, but he's not good at anything and is cowardly and timid. Ronan asks Asele if he wants to spend the rest of his life like this, wasting his natural-born talent on dealing with petty street thugs. He asks Asele if that's really the life he wants and says he has a long way to go in many ways. It's true that he's cowardly and timid. Plus, he's a crybaby that sheds tears way too easily, and a wimp who's afraid of his own shadow. But that doesn't really matter because he can change all that later. However, there is one thing that Asele can't change, the time that he wastes, and Ronan can assure him that he's going to regret it someday, inwardly saying it'll be just like he did in his previous life. He asks Asele if he's starting to change his mind, so Asele remarks that he can't believe someone like Ronan is so concerned about him of all people. Ronan says he won't force him since it's his life after all, and he's free to head back if he wants, but he has things to do. Asel asks him to wait and says he wants to change and will go with him to Philion. He tells Ronan to just tell him what he needs to do, so Ronan says he's finally starting to grow up, and asks if they should get started right away with his first challenge. Asel agrees, so Ronan menacingly remarks that it worked like a charm. Later, as they're watching something from a bush, Asel slowly asks Ronan if this is really his first challenge, so Ronan confirms that this is the best opponent he could find to give Asel's skills an instant boost. A Luna Goblin, a whole group of them in fact. Ronan cheerily asks Asel what he thinks, and says this should be a piece of cake, but Asel wonders why he thinks that, as Ronan asks if they should get started. Luna Goblins are a type of goblin mutant found in these parts. Their yellowish skin and hideous body are used to differentiate them from ordinary goblins, but in fact, the main distinguishing feature of Luna Goblins is their obsession with treasure. They attack merchants and steal their valuables without even the slightest hesitation. Then they gather all their treasure together and throw a party, but only on nights like this when the moon is full. Asel nervously asks if that's the reason they came here tonight, so Ronan confirms that they're going to steal all that treasure from them. Asel says he's never heard of goblins who steal treasures and throw celebrations, and asks Ronan how he knows about this, so he says he just heard about it somewhere, remarking that they can't tell him he saw them during his travels in his previous life. He tells Asel that all he has to do is use telekinesis to move their treasure while they're sleeping and put it in their bag. Asel mutters that it doesn't sound that easy and believes he could make a mistake and wake them up, which could put them in danger. He hurriedly argues that this is too risky, and suggests that they should think of something else. So Ronan calls him a coward, and tells him to listen carefully. If they're going to attend Philion, they need two things right now. The first is money. The tuition fees at Philion are ridiculously high. The second is real combat experience. The money is one thing, but this is actually more important. He explains that Philion is full of warriors from aristocratic families who have received elite education since birth. If he wants to compete with people like that, there's only one option. He needs to risk his life to accumulate real combat experience, which is why those goblins are such perfect targets. They can get both money and experience from them, so it's like killing two birds with one stone. He asks if he's wrong, and if Asel has a better idea, and Asel admits he doesn't. So Ronan says they should get started. Asel slowly transfers the gold into his bag, and Ronan smilingly says, "This takes care of the treasure since they've filled both bags." He cheerily reminds Asel of how he told him that nothing beats real experience. Asel is surprised by the fact that he really did it, and Ronan inwardly admits he wasn't totally sure if Asel could pull this off, but he got used to it surprisingly quickly, and is way more talented than he'd thought. He evilly smiles since he's found the perfect accomplice and says they should get going now that they've filled their bags. Asel asks if that's really it, so Ronan confirms that they're done here anyway, so they might as well head back before they get themselves into any trouble. They suddenly hear a pair of guys chasing a bird as they tell it to stop right there. Ronan wonders what's going on, and what kind of fool is making so much noise in the middle of the night. A goblin gets up and wonders what all this noise is before suddenly noticing that its treasure chest is empty. It hurriedly wakes the other goblins up and they all see Ronan and Asel in front of them. Ronan smilingly realizes they're in big trouble now. The goblins rush towards them, so he sighs and says he knew something like this would happen because nothing in his life ever seems to go smoothly. Asel asks what they should do now and suggests that they just leave their bags and run, but Ronan says they're not leaving anything behind. He asks Asel how they're going to pay the tuition without this treasure, and if Asel is going to earn the money for them. Asel hurriedly says that's not important right now as the goblins close in on them. Ronan raises his sword, remarking that this is just a cheap longsword made with low-quality iron. Considering the weight and strength of the blade, it will probably only last about 15 hits, but there must be at least 30 goblins here. Asel hurriedly tells Ronan to watch out as Ronan remarks that 15 hits are more than enough, and slices off 3 goblins' heads at once, shocking Asel as he mutters that leave 14 slashes. Ronan takes down the last goblin and says that wasn't so bad after all, as Asel remarks that he can't believe what he's just witnessed. Ronan slayed the tree goblins, leading the charge in one strike, and then slaughtered all the goblins behind them, so it was like he simply disappeared for a moment and suddenly reappeared out of nowhere. Ronan asks what he's doing and if he's going to just stand there, so Asel apologizes and says he doesn't know what came over him. Ronan says there's no need to apologize and tells him to just grab his stuff because they're going home. As they're walking, Ronan mutters that he's exhausted since he thought this was going to be a nice, light mission. But it looks nothing in life is ever easy. He wonders why his muscles are so sore from slashing a few, and if he's really not in shape yet. He realizes he needs to start doing some hardcore training when he gets back. Asel asks Ronan what that shout they heard just now was, but he asks how he would know. He questions what kind of fool shouts like that in the middle of the night and swears that if he ever finds out who that was, he'll make them pay for causing them all this trouble. An arrow is suddenly fired at Asel, but Ronan grabs it midair and asks, "What's this now?" Asel hurriedly asks where that came from as Ronan questions if this damn forest is haunted, and wonders what's with all the annoying pricks running around here at night. He sees two men in front of them who see that it's just a pair of kids. They apologize to Ronan for that, and say they heard something rustling from a distance and thought it might be a monster. A guy tells his partner that was close since they almost hurt them by accident. He smilingly asks if they're okay, but Ronan tells them to cut the crap since he sees the look in their eyes. He orders them to drop the act and answer him, "Who the hell are they both?" The guy steps forward and cheerily admits he was so flustered that he forgot to introduce himself. He apologizes for that and says he'll tell them who they are. He suddenly attacks Ronan with a knife and reveals that they are the Carabolo. Ronan grabs his hand and swiftly punches him in the face, remembering who the Carabolo were. The other guy hurriedly rushes towards him with a knife, but Asel quickly uses Invisible Hand to stop him and tells Ronan to look out. Stunned, the guy wonders what's going on since he can't move while Ronan appreciatively commends Asel, grabs the knife from the guy's hand and slashes through him. Asel watches in shock as the guy collapses and asks if he's dead, so Ronan asks if he was supposed to spare them when they were going to kill them. Besides, he reminds Asel of what they said. They're from the Carabolo. Surprised, Asel asks if he means the awful gang that does everything from poaching to kidnapping and human trafficking. He says that's the most notorious gang in the whole empire, so Ronan says that's exactly right, and stabs the other guy, explaining that if it wasn't for him, these two would have probably cut out Asel's organs and buried him tonight. He says it would be more of a crime to let these guys go and tells Asel to stop making a fuss and grab his bag. However, the bundle the guys were carrying suddenly starts moving, so Asel says they must have caught something, and it might be an animal they poached. Ronan agrees that he's probably right and decides to open it to find out. When they do, a weird bird suddenly flies out, so Ronan questions what kind of bird that is. Asel says he's never seen a bluebird before, so he says he hasn't either, but he notices that it has shackles and realizes that's the Carabolo snare. These shackles restrict movement by disturbing the ensnared creature's mana flow and are used by the Carabolo for poaching. Ronan says he's heard that they sometimes use these to catch rare animal species. However, a voice suddenly comes out from the bird and says they're finally connected. Shocked, Aseli asks if the bird just spoke, but Ronan says that's obviously not it. It's just a communication spell. Seeing that the spell was activated as soon as the bird came out of there, that bundle must have some kind of function that blocks mana. He sees that the person speaking must be the owner of this blue bird, so the man confirms this, revealing that his name is Baron and he studies the rare species of the imperial capital. He says he is the guardian of that dream bird, Marpes, but no matter what he tried, he couldn't seem to connect. So he thought he might have to report this to the police, and is relieved that Marpes is all right. He asks who Ronan is, so he says they're just a couple of good Samaritans who were passing by. They ended up in a little scuffle with the poachers who had kidnapped his bird, and they ended up saving his bird. Baron says he had feared that might have been the case, and thanks them for his help, admitting that he doesn't know how he'll ever repay them. Ronan asks how they're supposed to send the bird back to them since its feet are locked in shackles, and it can't really move. He asks Baron if it will be able to fly back to him if he unlocks these shackles, so Baron says it probably will, explaining that dream birds have a powerful homing instinct. In that case, Ronan swiftly breaks the bird's shackles. He expects Marpes to leave, but it turns around, so Baron explains that Marpes is telling Ronan to pluck a feather before she leaves, since she must want to see him again. He explains that dream bird feathers are like a compass. They point in the direction of the bird even after the feather has been plucked. If Ronan ever happens to stop by the capital, he should use the feather to come and visit him and Marpes, after which Marpes flies away. As Ronan watches it fly away, Asel asks what's in his hand, and he says he does feel something warm. A few days later, Ronan visits the head of the Caravel trading company, Duan Caravel. He examines the necklace and says he'll give them 20 gold coins for it since this is a real treasure here. He says everything they've brought him today is really valuable, so this must be his lucky day. Ronan sees that he finally found a respectable vendor since all the other merchants are a bunch of swindlers, and he was starting to really get pissed off at them. Ronan says he feels like all that work was worth the effort since he's finally met such an honest merchant. So Duan thanks him for his kind words, and asks if there's anything else he would like to have appraised. In that case, Ronan takes out a strange egg and asks if he can appraise this as well. It's not for sale, he just wants to know what it is. Ronan remarks that this is what that blue dream bird laid in his hand that night. At first, He thought Marpus pooped in his hand, but that's not it. And he knows that for a fact, because he tested it himself on a rock and found out how incredibly strong this thing is. Duan says he's not sure if this is an egg or what, but whatever it is, it came from one of those rare species, so it might be a priceless treasure. He admits he's not sure what it is, but there's definitely something unusual about it. So Ronan is better off having it looked at by a specialist. In any case, Ronan says he's too curious to sell it now and asks Duan if he sells books about Filion as well. He reveals that he and Asel were hoping to take Filion's entrance exam, but they don't know anything about it. Duan says that's great, and his daughter is applying for Filion as well, so she can probably help him and will be coming back any minute now. A girl arrives and asks who these people are, so Duan sees that she's back and introduces Maria to Ronan. Surprised, Ronan wonders if that's actually her, as Duan tells Maria these customers made a very big sale with them today, and calls them kids. Duan angrily asks where her manners have gone and asks Ronan and Asel to forgive her since even though she grew up around merchants, she has no verbal filter at times. Asel assures him that's fine, although she's not sure about Ronan. Ronan steps forward and asks Maria if that's really her name and if she's the one who geos by the neutral name, Sen. She confirms that she does and asks how he knows about that, so Ronan mutters that he knew she looked familiar and believes it must be her. In that case, he says he wants to ask her something and tells her to come closer. She asks what he wants to say, so he leans in and says he was just wondering if she has one of those down there. Shocked, Maria wonders what the hell he just said and angrily slaps him, telling him to shut up as Ronan wonders if Duan has a man he doesn't know about. Ronan remembers the feeling of this biting slap and realizes it really is him, Count Maria Sen. Back when Ronan was forced into the army as a penal soldier in Armalan, Maria was in charge of supplies. He was very strict, the kind of person who does everything by the book, but he was also easy to get along with and very sociable, so he made an impression on Ronan in many ways. However, for some reason, whenever any mention of something weird was made, he had a strange habit of flaring up and slapping Ronan. He always wondered why at the time, and wanted to ask him about it if he ever saw him again, but he unfortunately didn't get the chance because Maria died before him. He smirks and remarks that he didn't expect to find the reason here of all places, and sees that Maria is really a woman. Maria asks if he laughed at her and questions if he needs another slap. She rushes forward to attack him, but Ronan bonks her on the head and tells her to stop it. He tells her to not get cocky just because she hit him once, and says he only let her slap him because he made a mistake. She suddenly headbutts him and asks how he likes that as they fall down and continue beating each other up until Duan and Asel hurriedly try to break them up. A little while later, Asel wonders what happened to these two since they were at each other's throats just a few minutes ago, but for some reason, they seem really close now. Maria sees that these are the items Ronan kept for himself, and he tells her to let him know what she thinks of them since he'll buy something else if they're no good. She asks why he's keeping 3 swords and if they won't be too heavy to carry around. But Ronan says they're just in case since he tends to be pretty rough with swords. He asks what she thinks of them, so she says they're not bad, but this black steel sword is the best one among them. She says black steel swords are extremely sturdy, and even well-known knights often use them. She's not sure how rough he is with swords, but this would be hard to break. Ronan remarks that the black steel sword was his favorite type of weapon in his past life. Maria says she noticed that this magic wand has a very good mana stone embedded in it, and seeing that he kept this as well, she's guessing Asel is a mage. She asks Asel what kind of magic he uses, so he says it's telekinesis. Surprised, Maria says that's amazing, and he could probably get a scholarship at the academy. Then, she says the only problem is Ronan and her, and asks him what technique he's going to show them during the practical exam. She asks if he doesn't know that you have to demonstrate a technique in front of the professors in order to enter Filion. She says the written exam is obviously tough too, but not as tough as the practical one. And she hears you're basically guaranteed acceptance, as long as you do well on the practical exam. In other words, unless he proves himself during the exam, he can forget about ever studying at the academy. Ronan says he's just a swordsman and asks if it's enough to simply hack away at stuff. He asks what kind of techniques people usually show the professors. So Maria says applicants from noble families often demonstrate their family's secret technique. However, most people applying for the martial arts department show off their own unique mana combat technique. Ronan asks if she just said mana and questions how swordsmen there can use mana when they're not even mages. Maria asks what he means and says that's nothing to people applying for Filion, asking if he has mana resonance. She reveals that you're supposed to be able to use mana in combat, and that's one of the most basic requirements. She questions if he doesn't even know what mana resonance is, so he asks if it's the same as using aura. She wearily sighs and asks how he doesn't know that when he's applying to Philion. She can't believe he seriously just asked whether auras and mana are the same, so he says it was just a question, and tells her to stop making such a big deal about it. She says this won't do at all and tells him to come with her. She says she's going to borrow his short sword since she left hers at a blacksmith for repairs. Ronan annoyingly says he didn't say she could use his sword, and says she'll damage it, but she tells him to not worry since this will be over before anything happens to the sword. Just in case, she says if the sword is damaged, she'll pay him double or triple its value, and tells him to stop stalling and come with her since she's going to give him a special lesson. Mana is the energy source of the universe, like the air they breathe. It's a type of natural energy that exists everywhere, but not everyone can use it. In order to use mana, you need mana resonance, which is the ability to see and feel your own mana. Everyone reaches this stage at different times due to factors such as their training method or natural talent, but you usually have to train for about 1 year in order to activate the sense in the applicants. To Philion Academy don't just sense mana. These are people who have already learned how to use their own mana in combat. Maria asks Ronan if he gets it now. He doesn't even know the difference between mana and auras, let alone mana resonance, so the idea of someone like him studying at Philion is completely ridiculous. Granted, she supposes auras are a type of mana, but the two of them are as different as night and day. Ronan is surprised to hear that they're that different, so she explains that even the most gifted warriors have to undergo 10 years of grueling training, just to unlock their own unique power. In other words, their aura. She asks if he's starting to understand now, so Ronan confirms that he is, remarking that he encountered people like that in the war occasionally. Arrogant idiots who claim to be aura users and use some kind of strange power. They were certainly harder to kill than most people, but he didn't know they were such a big deal since one good slash was still enough to kill them anyway. Now that that's done, Maria asks if they should get started, and says she has a feeling he's probably more of a hands-on learner. Ronan doesn't expect her to be that strong since she's just a kid, but Maria suddenly rushes towards him, so he swiftly blocks her attack. He remarks that she's already quite strong for her age, and she's using double swords too. It's hard to tell since he can't see it, but this must be what she meant by fighting with mana. Maria wonders what's going on since she thought she could finish him off in one strike, and wanted to make him give up on taking the entrance exam by showing him the power of mana. She figured that would be much better than allowing him to go and humiliate himself at the test site, and yet for some reason, he's overpowering her. She wonders how someone can be so strong without even using mana, but Ronan suddenly asks what she's thinking and disarms her, saying she should try to dodge his next attack instead of blocking it. As she's thrown back, she admits that was really close, and tells Ronan he's quite something, so he says the same goes for her. On top of her ability to use mana, she has a gift for sword fighting and needs to work on balance, so if she fixes that, she'll make a huge improvement. He turns around and starts leaving, so Maria asks where he's going and asks if he really thinks he won. Ronan says it doesn't matter who won, and tells her to just keep her promise, reminding her that she has to pay him triple the value of the sword as it shatters in her hands. Stunned, Maria asks how it broke, so Ronan says she owes him for that. Acel tells Maria that was really impressive just now, and leaves with Ronan, as Maria wonders who the hell he is. The next morning, Ronan says he only came to collect the money for his sword, and asks why she's giving him so many books. So Maria says these are Philion practice written exams, along with a summary she wrote up for him. She tells him he'll be needing them since the exam is only 1 month away, so Ronan agrees but asks why she's doing all this for them, warning that she shouldn't think of ripping him off. She assures him that it's nothing like that, she just really likes them both, and is throwing in all this as a gesture of goodwill, so it's obviously free. She wishes she could teach him herself, but she has to leave right away on business, so he'd better study hard on his own. She says she'll make him feel sorry if he fails the exam after she prepared all this stuff for him, so Ronan agrees and tells her to just worry about herself. As she leaves on the cart, she waves them goodbye and says she'll see them in the capital on the day of the exam, so they shouldn't skip over any of those books. Ronan remarks that he still needs to train his weak body, and he'll have to actually study for the first time in his life, but he doesn't feel too bad. After returning home, Ronan's day-to-day life was more or less the same as usual, although he was beginning to change little by little. He ate with his sister Iriel and stuffed himself at every meal. With all those extra calories, he went around hunting monsters on the outskirts of town and gradually built up both his stamina and endurance. Ronan decides to stop here for today after wiping out every last monster around town. Finally, he began studying, something he could have never imagined doing as a penal soldier. He annoyingly wonders why he has to memorize northern table manners. He wasn't sure how the exam would go, but he tried his best to prepare for it. A month passed, and finally the stage of their story is Valon, the imperial capital. To be more precise, it's a particular area known as the home of the Empire's greatest educational institute, the White Town Borough. Acel can't believe he's finally here at Philion and says the city itself is like a work of art. Ronan tells him to not just stand there in the middle of the street and to stop looking like a country bumpkin since they'll be late for the exam. Acel says he just can't get used to seeing Ronan like this since in only 1 month, it feels like he's gotten a lot bigger. Ronan asks what he's talking about and tells him to get moving. Come to think of it, he wonders if that guy will be at Philion around this time. Schlieffen the Swordmaster, the head of the Grancia family famous for their sword mastery, as well as a genius swordsman known throughout the Empire. Ronan remembers that he was around his age, and wonders if he'll see him at the exam. Not that it matters. Acel asks Ronan if he brought that thing with him, the feather he plucked from that dream bird he saved, the one that points in the direction of the bird's owner. Ronan says he packed it before they left, and he remembered the man said he lives in the capital, so he was thinking of paying him a visit after the entrance exam. Surprised, Ronan realizes the feather is pointing at the top floor of Philion Academy. The professor of zoology at Philion, Baron Panetzier, says he's still not suited to all this teaching work, so he should perhaps go back to being an explorer. Marpus chirps to encourage him, so he agrees that he should stick around here for now, since he still needs to repay the person who saved her after all. He decides to open the windows to air out the place, and wonders if her savior will turn up today. However, when he opens a window, he's greeted by Ronan's menacing face as he says he didn't even knock yet, but the window opened. He notices Marpus sitting on Baron's shoulder and says he must be the owner, shocking him. Baron hurriedly hugs Marps and asks who Ronan is, and what he was doing outside his window when this is almost the top floor. Ronan and Acel step in, and he mutters that all the screaming almost burst his eardrums, so Acel says she told him they should have taken the stairs. Baron shakily asks if they're after his beloved Marpus, but he suddenly notices the feather in Ronan's hands and asks if he and Acel are the people who saved Marpus. They sit down and Baron bows in forgiveness, admitting that that was a disgraceful way for him to treat Marpus's rescuers. Ronan repeats that it's fine and says he doesn't need to keep apologizing since if you think about it, it's really Acel's fault for insisting on climbing up to the window like that. Acel asks how it's his fault when Ronan told him to use telekinesis because he didn't feel like taking the stairs, but Ronan hurriedly tells him to stay quiet. He says he never imagined Baron would be a werelion since the rarest type of werebeasts, and not only is he Marp's owner, he's a professor at Philion on top of that. Baron says he surprised him as well since he had no idea he was applying for the academy. He says if he knew this sooner, he wouldn't written him a recommendation letter, but today is already the exam day. He says he's sure Ronan will do well, but if he does happen to fail, he'll gladly write him a letter. On another note, Ronan says he'd like to ask him something while they're here, and says they don't have much time as he knows. Ronan asks if he knows what the egg is since Marpus laid it before leaving. Shocked, Baron asks if that's a dream bird egg, and questions if he's really saying Marpus laid this for him. Ronan asks what the big deal is, since it's normal for birds to lay eggs, but Baron assures him that this is very remarkable indeed. After all, Marpus is no ordinary bird. She's a dream bird. But that's not even the greatest surprise. The most astonishing thing of all is that there's no way of knowing what kind of creature will emerge from this egg. Ronan asks what he means when this is a bird egg, and a bird will come out of it when it hatches. However, Baron says dream birds are different. When dream birds lay eggs, they infuse them with the unique mana of their surroundings, or a particular person. An egg conceived near lava will produce a firebird covered in flames, while a dream bird born in a monster lair will have the appearance of a monster. In such cases, the dream bird doesn't even look like a bird anymore. Of course, if you analyze the mana radiating from an egg, it's possible to predict what appearance the dream bird will have when it's born. But this egg is different. There are so many strains of mana swirling around together within it like a mixture of metals in a blast furnace that at this moment, he's afraid he can't tell him what exactly is in the egg, even though he's embarrassed to admit it. Ronan is surprised by so much mystery around the egg, and asks Marpus where she's been wandering around, and how she managed to lay an egg like that. Baron asks Ronan if he minds holding on to the egg for now, so Ronan says it doesn't matter to him, but asks if he's sure he's okay with him having it, since it seems very valuable. Baron says it is extremely valuable since dream birds only lay one egg in their entire lifetime. But the fact that Marpus laid her one and only egg for him means she must have sensed something special about him. He says Marpus is an old friend of Hai and he would like to respect her wishes, so he asks Ronan to hold on to the egg for now. Ronan says that's fine by him since he's curious to see what will come of it. He gets up, saying it's almost time for the exam, and they've finished their business here. However, Baron says he's been wondering what to give him as a token of gratitude, and he thought of the perfect gift. He gives him some papers and says these will help him hatch the egg. A while later, on the practical exam site, in the main building of Fort Galarian, students are sitting in the waiting room for applicants taking the martial arts exam and enter the exam hall one by one. 112 heads in, so Ronan says he'll be next and mutters that they really make students wait a long time. He asks Maria if she agrees, so she says waiting is half the battle in any exam. He asks why she's dressed like that since her clothes look really uncomfortable, so she says she wanted to dress up for the occasion. Philion is a meeting place of people from the wealthiest families all over the empire, and she might have to do business with some of them later, so she doesn't want to look like an amateur. On another note, she wishes Asel was here with them, so Ronan mutters that it can't be helped that the mage exams are held in a different area. He just hopes Asel isn't crying when the man in front calls his name and tells him to enter the exam hall. As he gets up, Maria tells him to just do his best and try to not be nervous. She adds that he'll make him sorry if he fails, so he thanks her for the encouragement and enters. Inside the room, Ronan is standing in front of the Philian professors and remarks that they all look quite intimidating. But the ones that stand out the most are that old man in the middle, headmaster of Philian Academy, Kravar Kratier, and the woman next to him, sword-fighting instructor, Navaros, since he's hardly met anyone with such intense energy even in his previous life. He bows and introduces himself, so Kravar greets him and says they would like him to demonstrate a technique for them on the enchanted dummy. He asks what he wants to show them, so he says it's nothing too fancy, just a quick slash that should suffice for a dummy. A professor is surprised to hear that he'll perform an ordinary slash without any mana at the Philian Academy of all places, and mutters that there's always one like him in every group of applicants, the kind of person who underestimate the enchanted dunny and ends up making a fool of themselves. Another professor suggests that he might be from the distant country, which could explain his ignorance. The dummy may not look like much, but it can withstand even most auras, and is equipped with a high-speed self-recovery function. A lot of sophisticated magic engineering went into its design, and even that genius, Schlieffen, barely managed to make a scratch on it. So what does this kid intend to show them? The professor jokingly wonders if he'll surprise them by cutting it in half. Hearing which, Kravar annoyingly remarks that that's no way to talk right in front of an applicant, since the poor boy might be discouraged by them. However, he suddenly wonders what's going on and how Ronan can give off such energy at that age. Ronan swiftly slices through the dummy's head, shocking Navaros. He sheathes his sword and says that concludes his demonstration. A professor laughingly say they didn't think he was really going to do only one slash, and another one says he's not sure how to evaluate this. He asks Kravar how he feels, but Kravar is slack-jawed in shock. Navaros suddenly rushes towards Roran and puts her sword on his neck. He calmly says she scared him before she threateningly asks who he is and where he learnt that sword technique. From Ronan asks what she means, so she decides to rephrase the question and asks if he saw what she did just now. Ronan confirms that he did, in the time it would take most people to draw their sword. She slashed 3 times. Navaros agrees and says it was just like the slash he so arrogantly performed a moment ago. She says she saw that little trick of his, and how he slowed down the final slash to the side on purpose to make sure they wouldn't miss it. Ronan remarks that there seems to have been a misunderstanding. He only slowed down at the end because he was afraid the sword might not withstand the blow. But judging from the way she's looking at him, she probably wouldn't believe him. She sheathes her sword and returns to the desk, saying she's going to teach him herself. Kravar sighs and remarks that it seems like she's already accepted Ronan as a student, but someone needs to be the voice of reason here, so it looks like it'll have to be him. Kravar says they will conclude with one final question and asks what he came to learn at Philian. Ronan remarks that that's a difficult question and says he wants to learn how not to regret his mistakes. Surprised, Kravar tells him to take care, so Ronan leaves. The other professors hurriedly ask Kravar if Ronan has performed some sort of trickery, so Kravar says one could call it that, considering the immense amount of talent he has as the dummy's severed head falls to the ground, shocking them. All that's left is the written exam, and Ronan is sure he'll be fine since he's been studying furiously, but he later admits he totally screwed up. Maria learns that Ronan only studied half the material she gave him because he got too focused on that, and tells him to quit whining since the practical exam counts for more anyway, and she's sure he'll be fine with his talent. The results suddenly show up, and Maria and Asel see that they both got in, and Asel's gotten first place on the written exam, but Ronan depressingly sees that he didn't get in. However, a ball of fire suddenly lands on the ground and a phoenix rises out of it to reveal that Ronan got first place in the practical exam and is the salutatorian of the martial arts department, shocking them. As Maria and Asel are celebrating, Ronan realizes the fact that he came in first place means that guy lost to him, so he definitely won't be pleased. A boy menacingly approaches Ronan, who remarks that he thought he might show up and sees that he's finally going to meet Schlieffen the Swordmaster. Surprised, the students wonder if that's Schlieffen, and say they didn't expect to see the Empire's brightest star here. Maria tells Ronan she has a feeling Schlieffen wants to talk to him, as he annoyingly remarks that this is a nuisance, and Schlieffen hasn't changed one bit since his previous life. He absolutely can't stand the thought of anyone else being a better swordsman than him. He's obsessed with winning, so Ronan has to try to find a way out of this. Ronan asks Schlieffen if he's asking if he's the guy in first place, and says he's not quite sure of what he's getting at. Schlieffen frowns and asks why he's lying to him, but Ronan says that's nonsense, and says if he's saying he's not the guy Schlieffen is looking for, then that's that. He asks Schlieffen if he has any proof and tells him to stop being a bully and to just mind his own business. Schlieffen asks if he wants proof, and instantly attacks Ronan to show him proof, but Ronan blocks his sword. Schlieffen says he knew he was right. If Ronan wasn't the guy in first place, he wouldn't have been able to block his attack just now. Now he tells Ronan to show him his skills since he wants to see if he's really good enough to beat him. Ronan angrily says he's had enough of this crap and agrees, declaring that he'll show him what he really wants. He uses the technique he had previously used in the test, and asks Schlieffen if he's happy now. He says he can see why Ronan scored so highly on the exam, and admits that his technique is very impressive, but he rushes forward and attacks again, telling Ronan he's not good enough to defeat him. Ronan asks if he can just knock it off already, but Schlieffen tells him to show him everything he's hiding, declaring that he still can't accept this. Ronan wonders what's wrong with him, and if he's really trying to kill him. He remarks that this is why he was hoping to avoid him. He wonders what'll happen if Schlieffen ends up using his aura, and admits that wouldn't be good, since one strike of his powerful aura creates a blast of wind, which is why they call it the Maelstrom Blade. There's no way he can survive that, so in that case, he starts running away. Stunned, Schlieffen asks what he's doing and tells him to never turn his back on an opponent in the middle of a duel. He rushes forward and says he won't let him get away, but Ronan suddenly grabs a cell. Schlieffen calls Ronan a coward and questions how he dared to use a lady as a shield when he calls himself a knight. However, Acel reveals that he's a man as Ronan menacingly tells Schlieffen he hasn't changed one bit, and even in his dying moments, chivalry is all he cares about. He smacks Schlieffen in the face and quickly tells Acel and Marya that now's their chance, so they should get out of here. They suddenly start running away, even though Schlieffen tells them to wait. Once they're gone, a teacher arrives, saying he heard a fight broke out and is stunned to see Schlieffen. He asks what happened and who did this to him. He tells Schlieffen to describe them to him so that he can send out some guards to find them. However, Schlieffen says he doesn't have to be so formal with him. He's not the son of a noble family here. He's just another new student and there's no need to worry about this. It was a fair fight. He brushes the dust off of himself and says he'll handle it himself, but he shockingly notices that this sword is cracked, even though it's a legendary blade made out of premium mithril. He remarks that he could tell Ronan is no ordinary swordsman, but he can't believe he managed to do this with a blade like that. He chuckles and tells Ronan he'll remember him. The next day in Shimo Forest, near the Imperial capital, Ronan is walking with Acel and mutters that it should be around here somewhere. Acel asks if he's sure they're safe here, so he asks Acel what he means. Acel explains that Schlieffen is the heir of the Gransha family, the most powerful family of noblemen after the Imperial family, and Ronan broke his nose, so what'll they do if he decides to get revenge on him? Ronan tells him to not worry since he may be obsessed with winning, but he's not a bad guy. He values trust and principles, and he sets a good example for anyone seeking to protect those in need, so one could say he's a model nobleman. He's sure Schlieffen recognizes that he lost fair and square yesterday, otherwise they'd be in chains right about now. Acel agrees that makes sense, and Ronan says they're finally here, at the mana vein Professor Baron told them about, Pinardo Pond. For some reason, sometimes the mana flowing throughout the world gathers in one place and forms a kind of puddle. A mana vein. The very existence of a mana vein is enough to infuse everything around it with mana. Ordinary rocks turn into premium mana stones, and common weeds are transformed into powerful medicinal herbs. That's why mana veins are so famous for their power. Ronan explains that they're worth a fortune, so most people want to keep them to themselves if they find one, and admits this was really generous of the Baron, since he can't believe he told them about the mana vein just so that they'd bring the egg here. He asks Acel how he feels, and if he's noticing anything different, so Acel says he's never been anywhere so full of mana before, and feels like he can use far more advanced spells than usual here. He says he could sense the egg in Ronan's pocket before, but it's absorbing mana at an incredible rate now, so it really must like the mana here. Surprised, Ronan says he still doesn't sense anything, but he'll take his word for it, and bets Marya would have loved this place too, but she's away on a business. Isel agrees and asks Ronan if anything seems strange to him. Ronan asks what he means, so he reminds him of what Professor Barron said. This place is so full of mana that even rare species often build their nests here, so you'd expect there to be at least ordinary animals around. But for some reason, he doesn't hear a single animal sound. Surprised, Ronan remarks that he can't let his guard down, and annoyingly says he thinks there's more trouble coming. He questions why everything is always so complicated, and tells Isel to brace himself because he can smell blood. Isel asks Ronan what he means by blood, so Ronan asks if it's not obvious that someone got here before they did, and says he has a feeling they weren't invited. Arrows suddenly fly towards them, but Ronan easily blocks them and recognizes that the arrows are the same ones from before. In the past, at the penal soldiers' camp, a boy holds up an arrow and asks the others if they have any idea how powerful these are. He explains that they're a special kind of arrow capable of piercing even the skulls of most orcs. He asks Ronan if he's interested now, but Ronan wearily sighs and says, there he goes again. He asks the boy if he realizes that he got busted for poaching with those arrows, and questions what the heck he's bragging about before telling him to just sit down and shut up. The boy hurriedly insists that this is the deal of a lifetime, and explains that in order to use these arrows, you have to be an elite member of their organization who's successfully completed at least 100 poaching missions, and declares that they're known as the Carabolos hunting dogs. Presently, Ronan remarks that it's the Carabolo again, and they're hunting dogs this time. He says this worked out pretty nicely and tells Isel to find somewhere to hide. He warns him to be careful, or he'll have more arrows sticking out of him than a hedgehog, because he needs to go take care of some business. He suddenly rushes away, as the Carabolo hunting dogs question if that guy just deflected all those arrows with a single sword strike, but they were infused with mana. They wonder who the hell he is as Ronan swiftly rushes through the forest. A man hurriedly tells the other hunting dogs to spread out so they can surround Ronan. Ronan remarks that that guy is a quick thinker. He's different from those amateurs they ran into the forest last time. He inwardly says this could be a bit of a nuisance and decides to do something else in that case. He comes to a stop and announces that they shouldn't shoot, questioning if they can't recognize one of their allies. The hunting dogs suddenly pause when they hear this and question what the hell he's talking about, so Ronan smilingly says it looks like they haven't heard him yet, and declares that he is the Damas chapter's youngest hunting dog and introduces himself as a Hayute. The men surround Ronan and ask if he's really a hunting dog. Ronan asks if they don't believe him, so the man questions if he expects them to believe that a kid like him is a hunting dog. They could understand if he was a lowly messenger or something, but not a hunting dog. If they don't believe him, Ronan tells them to ask his chapter's wolf and decides to give them a word of advice. It's a very bad habit to assume that something is impossible for others just because it's impossible for him, since it honestly makes him look really pathetic. The man angrily calls Ronan a little prick and asks how he dares to insult him. He grabs him by the collar and says he ought to chop him up right here. Ronan sees that he has a temper too and says things never end well for guys like him. A hunting dog tells the man to calm down, saying he knows he seems too young to be a hunting dog, but he should think about it. How else would he know so much about the Carabolos hierarchy and chapters? He suggests that they should ask the captain about Ronan first, since if this guy is telling the truth, messing with him could lead to trouble with the Damas chapter later. A man arrives and asks what's all this commotion when all he asked is that they keep quiet and stand guard. The men shockingly realize the captain, the wolf of the Demir chapter, Vium, is here. The guy tells Vium he came just in time and tells him about what Ronan is claiming. Ronan smilingly remarks that the wolf has arrived, so it looks like they're all here now. Vium asks Ronan if he said he's a Hayut from the Damas chapter. Ronan confirms this, so Vium says that's strange and asks what brings him here when he thought it was agreed that this vein belongs to the Demir chapter. Ronan cheerily asks if that's the case and says he wouldn't know anything about that because he's not a Hayute. Vium angrily asks what he means before Ronan instantly slashes through 3 men at once and says he just told him the name of the idiot he hates more than anyone in the world since he figured that name would suit a despicable poacher. He rushes towards Vium and swiftly cuts through his neck. As Vium's head falls on the ground, the guy from before watches in shock. Ronan asks if he remembers what he said before and says he told him things never end well for guys like him. He suddenly cuts off the guy's fingers on one hand. Shocked, he falls to the ground in pain and starts screaming, but Ronan tells him to not be such a baby and says if he wants to live, he'd better snap out of it and take this. He throws a page in front of him and tells him to write down the location of every chapter he knows of on the back of that piece of paper right now. When the man doesn't do it, Ronan asks if he should take that as a refusal and says he's no good to him alive if that's the case. The man hurriedly assures him he'll do anything he wants, but he doesn't have anything to draw a map with. However, Ronan asks what he's talking about when he just gave him a tool to write with. His hand is right there. Later, Ronan tells the man he did very good, and he can tell the man tried to make the map as detailed as possible. He's pretty talented. The man wearily thanks him and asks if that means Ronan will spare him like he promised. However, Ronan suddenly slashes through him and says he obviously won't do that. As Asel is breathing heavily, Ronan tells him to not make such a fuss, since he told him to brace himself. Asel apologizes but says he didn't expect this, questioning if all these dead animals are really the work of Carabollo. Ronan says, like he said before, it would be a crime to let any of those idiots alive. He tells Asel to not worry, they're all wanted criminals and no one cares if they're dead. On another note, he wonders what Professor Barron would think if he saw this and imagines that he'd probably be devastated. He asks if they should head back now, but his pouch suddenly starts twitching, so he wonders what's going on. As it keeps moving, he opens it and questions what's gotten into this thing, as Asel slowly points to the air and nervously asks, "What's that?" Ronan asks what he means, but suddenly sees drops of blood rising into the air to start forming something. He angrily questions what the hell this is now as the blood forms a giant pool. Ronan hurriedly stands in front of a screaming Asel and gets ready to take his sword out. However, the egg he had been carrying slowly rises into the air and starts flashing before beginning to absorb the blood in front of them. Shocked, Asel asks what's going on, but Ronan tells him to not ask him because he has no idea. But on second thought, he says he can tell him one thing. Whatever is in that egg is no ordinary creature. Once the egg has absorbed enough blood, it stops shining, so Asel asks if it's over. Ronan sees it looks like it, but he doesn't really see anything different about the egg. However, the egg suddenly starts cracking and Ronan realizes it's hatching. He happily cheers it on and says they'll see what's so special about this damn dream bird when he finally gets to see the creature's face. However, something suddenly smacks him in the face. Ronan annoyingly questions what the hell that was as he massages his nose. They shockingly see a creature flying in front of him and wonder if that's really the dream bird. On second thought, Ronan mutters that doesn't look like any bird he's ever seen. Asel says it looks more like a dragon, and Ronan says he thinks so too, so Asel says that's what the dragons in books usually look like. Ronan wonders where the heck the bird absorbed mana from to give birth to something like this, and acknowledges that it is kind of cute as he pets it on the face. However, he annoyingly tells it that's no way to greet someone, and it can't just punch him in the face like that. When the dream bird hears this, it unexpectedly casts a spell and heals the cut on Ronan's nose, shocking them. Ronan questions if his cut just healed, and Asel says it must know some kind of healing spell. Asel says she's really cute and that she seems to really like Ronan, so he cheerily says she's more talented than he'd thought. Asel says they should name her since they can't just keep referring to her as the dream bird. So Ronan agrees that he's right and wonders what would be a good name for her. However, the dream bird suddenly looks away, flies off. Asel asks where it's going, so Ronan believes it must have sensed something. Meanwhile, Demir Chapter's errand boy Valis hurriedly wonders what the hell happened. As he's running, he remarks that when he got back from his errand, all the Carabollo hunting dogs were dead, and he wonders what that swirling cloud of blood was just now, and what in the world is going on right now. He suddenly realizes the dream bird is chasing him and tries to run away, but he trips and falls down, injuring his knee. The blood from his knee suddenly starts being absorbed by the dream bird. Shocked, he questions what's happening to his blood and hurriedly shouts for someone to help him. Ronan steps forward and tells the dream bird, Sita, to stop. He says that's enough, otherwise she'll kill him. Asel asks if Sita is her name, so Ronan says he just thought of it, and asks Sita what she thinks and if she likes it, so she happily calls to answer. Valis realizes that Kid is the guy he saw a minute ago and wonders if he's the owner of that monster. Ronan asks Valis if he's alright, so he hurriedly says he is, and gratefully thanks Ronan for saving him. However, he suddenly realizes something and asks Ronan how he knows his name. Ronan suddenly puts a sword on his neck and says he doesn't need to think about that. He says he didn't expect to run into him like this, but it's good to see him, and asks how the poaching business has been lately, calling him a Carabollo hunting dog, as Valis is revealed to be the person Ronan knew in his past life. Ronan hurriedly says he's not a hunting dog. He's just an errand boy, so Ronan sees that he hasn't been promoted yet, but says either way, this is good timing because he needs him to do something for him. Additionally, he decides to make something clear, and cheerily says, this is not a request. Ronan says this is excellent and they got way more money than he expected. Asel agrees and says he can't believe how much they made. Ronan says when Asel told him that even spring water is gold in a mana vein, and suggested they take some with them, he was a bit confused at first about what he meant and didn't think Maria's father would buy it at such a high price. Asel says they won't need to worry about money anymore thanks to that mana vein, so Ronan agrees and says they owe Professor Barron for this. He was hoping to stop by and show him Sita while they're in the neighborhood, but it looks like he's not here right now, which is too bad, but still. He has that map the hunting dog drew for him. Plus, there's that task that he assigned to Valis. That should be enough to thank the professor, and he scared Valis so badly that he won't dare to get any funny ideas. Acel asks Ronan what he's going to do with all that money since, as the salutatorian, he's exempt from paying tuition in addition to receiving a stipend, so he doesn't really have any major expenses to worry about. He asks if there's anything he'd like to do, so Ronan thinks about it and remarks that the entrance ceremony is coming up soon. A few days later at the stagecoach station in downtown Valon, a butler opens the door to a carriage and informs Iriel that she has arrived at her destination. She thanks him and is surprised to see Valon, the imperial capital, so she happily says this is incredible. Ronan thanks her for making the trip and asks if everything's been okay since he's been gone, so she says she should be asking him that, questioning if he has any idea how shocked she was to see such a fancy stagecoach outside the house. She asks how he can afford that and why he looks so thin, asking if he's been eating enough. He tells her to not worry because he's eating plenty. She says she sure hopes so, and happily asks what the creature sitting on his shoulder is since she's really cute. Ronan says her name is Sita, and it's a bit of a long story, but basically, she's traveling with him. He says they'd better get going since there's not much time. She asks where they're going, so he says he's going to be busy for a while. When school starts, that's why he'd like to take this time to try something he's always wanted to do. Later, Iriel nervously says she knows Ronan made a bunch of money recently, and that he received a scholarship from the academy, but still, this present seems a little too extravagant, and all these gifts are way too much for her. However, Ronan asks what the big deal is when she's been working hard all her life. He says it's time for him to do something for her hearing, which she gets teary-eyed and says he's grown up so much. She happily tells everyone to look at how sweet her brother is as he hurriedly tries to stop her. He quickly says that's enough shopping for now, so they should get going. Iriel cheerily agrees and asks where their next stop is, so he says they should take a look at the blacksmiths in the area since he chipped his sword recently because of some prick. However, he opens the door to see Schlieffen in front of him, who asks if he's finally done shopping. Shocked, Ronan hurriedly asks what he's doing here and if he's some kind of stalker. Schlieffen says he was in the area picking up a new sword he ordered, since thanks to him, his old one is broken. Then he happened to see Ronan and decided to wait, so he hopes there's no misunderstanding. Ronan sees that he really is a stalker and asks if he just said he broke his sword. He annoyingly asks Schlieffen if he's seen what he did to his sword, and says he's one to talk, saying he should really break his sword this time, so Schlieffen agrees that that's not a bad idea since he was hoping for a rematch. However, Iriel steps between them and reminds Ronan that she told him to behave himself. Ronan says that Jerk started it, but she asks what she just said and apologizes to Schlieffen for that, since her little brother can be a bit rough at times, but he has a kind heart. She asks if he's all right, as Schlieffen wonders if she's Ronan's sister and falls for her. Schlieffen, heir to the noble Grancia family and star of the Empire, would later describe this moment as him seeing a goddess. Iriel says this is all her fault, and as Ronan's older sister, she should have educated him better, so she asks Schlieffen to forgive her brother. Schlieffen hurriedly collects himself and admits he brought this upon himself, so she's done nothing wrong, and he'll take full responsibility for this incident, so she shouldn't worry. Iriel asks if he means that, and happily says that's really kind of him. She clasps his hands and says she's really relieved that Ronan knows someone as noble as him, so she hopes he'll look after her little brother for her. Ronan watches with a stunned face as Schlieffen blushingly says, first of all, he'd like to compensate her brother for his sword, but he doesn't have any cash on him at the moment, so he wants her to take this for now. He holds forward an identification token used by his family, and says she can use it anywhere in the Empire, shocking Ronan, who questions what's going on. He asks Schlieffen if he realizes what this thing is, but Schlieffen cuts him off and tells Iriel that if she's going to buy a sword, he recommends the blacksmith at the west end of the blacksmith lane. They boast a history going back over 500 years, and they don't just let anyone in there, but she should be able to enter with that identification token. He says he hopes they find a good sword, and blushingly leaves, so Ronan wonders what the hell happened, and if Schlieffen realizes what he just said, since with a Grancia family identification token, he could probably buy a whole village, so is that really the same swordmaster Schlieffen that he knew? The next day, on the day of the Filian Academy's entrance ceremony, Craver welcomes the students of Class 787 and introduces himself as the headmaster of the Filian Academy. He explains that, as they all know, everyone here today has met the Academy's strict requirements and demonstrated their potential. They hope to combine their outstanding talents with Filian's exceptional education, and in doing so, they believe they will all be remembered in the Empire's history, so he congratulates them all on their acceptance to the Academy. Ronan wearily wonders if this is going to go on all day and remarks that it might be okay to have these ceremonies once in a while, and Iriel is probably enjoying it. Now then, Craver suddenly snaps his fingers to reveal a huge crack in the air above them. Stunned, the students realize the sky is breaking before they're all suddenly teleported somewhere else. Surprised, Ronan questions if he just teleported the whole place somewhere else with a wave of his hand. Craver announces that this is the climax of Filian's entrance ceremony, and they will now begin the meeting between the older and younger students. The meeting of the older and younger students is an opportunity for the incoming first year and current second-year students to meet each other for the first time. It's an event unique to Filion and known for being extremely intense. Why is it so intense, you ask? The first-year valedictorian and salutatorian choose two of the top 4 second years with different combat styles, and then they're paired up for a one-on-one duel. Craver says the significance of this event is closely related to Filion's educational philosophy. They believe that students should learn not only from their teachers, but from their fellow students as well. This process of correcting one's flaws and competing with one another is where true education begins. You might say that this event represents the first step of that process. The duel between the top students of each grade initiates the educational journey here at Filion. Of course, the first-year students have the right to choose their own sparring partner, and they may refuse to take part in the event altogether if they choose. So he asks the first-year representatives to not feel pressured, as they are free to do as they please. Ronan mutters that behind all that fancy talk, what he's really saying is that this is a way of disciplining the first years. The second-year valedictorian of the martial arts department, Nazdo, and the second-year salutatorian of the martial arts department, Braum, see that these are the famous freshmen they've heard so much about. The fourth best second-year student of the martial arts department, Karun, and the third best second-year student of the martial arts department, Irina, face them, as well as Braun sees that this is Schlieffen, the Empire's greatest prodigy, and Ronan, the rising star who beat him on the practical exam. He says he can hardly wait for this and tells Ronan to come on since he's dying to fight one of them. As Iriel worryingly watches him from the stands, Ronan remarks that he didn't see this coming, but he's sure he can prove to his sister that no one can push him around, and if he shows that he can make friends, then even better. Craver tells the first-year representatives to go ahead and choose their sparring partners, so Ronan raises his hand and says he'd like to propose something if they don't mind. Craver asks what he proposes, so Ronan asks if they're really free to choose whoever they like. If so, then he'd like to request a duel with all his esteemed superiors, and just to clarify, he smilingly says he means all of them at once, of course, shocking all the teachers and second years. The teachers decide to discuss this first, and Craver asks Navaros what she thinks of Ronan's proposal. She says she thinks they should do it since, after all, Filion's highest principle is that students should be given as much freedom as their abilities allow. In that sense, regardless of who wins, she believes this will be a meaningful duel for many people, and if there are any signs of a safety risk, she will step in and stop the duel. Craver agrees and says in that case, they'll proceed with the duel. As Ronan faces the second years, Karun angrily says this is ridiculous, and questions who that little punk takes them for, and Irina asks if he thinks he's some kind of big shot just because the salutatorian. They say they'll teach him a lesson once and for all, but Nazdo tells them all to calm down since he may be arrogant, but they shouldn't forget that he defeated Schlieffen, and they shouldn't take him too lightly. He tells them to give Ronan everything they've got right from the start, so they all seriously brace themselves as Iriel worryingly says she has a bad feeling about this, and shouts to Ronan to be careful, saying he should surrender right away if he senses any danger. Ronan smilingly waves at her so she understands as the meeting of the older and younger students is started. Nizdo instantly rushes forward and attacks, but Ronan quickly dodges, remarking that he's definitely no pushover, and he'd say he's several times more advanced than Maria was when he fought her, so he thinks the top 4 second-year students really do deserve their reputation. Irina attacks him as well, but he quickly blocks her attacks before Karun tells Irina to get down, and they both attack at once. Ronan blocks again and says they're even good at joint attacks. As he's pushed back, he looks up to see Braum raise his sword. He asks Ronan what he was thinking, and says he really wanted to enjoy their duel a bit longer as he brings his sword down. Ronan remarks that this is a quick but powerful finishing move, connecting moves without any hesitation between them. They're all extremely advanced. The other three students rush towards him, but Ronan swiftly dodges. Shocked, Irina asks how he's so fast before Ronan attacks her. Nazdo and Karun inwardly admits he's very impressed by Filion. He sees that Braum is still standing and says he sure is tough since he thought he'd give up by now. He says here's one last attack out of respect for him, and gets ready for his attack. Shocked, Braum realizes that position must mean he's planning to use Miss Navarrose's attack. Ronan smiles and swiftly slashes through him, destroying his sword, after which he turns around, saying that was a great learning experience, and thanking them all. The audience watches in shock and happily shouts that freshman is incredible, with people saying they thought Ronan was going to lose at first, but he crushed them all like it was nothing. They question if that's really a first year, as the second years watch in shock and question what just happened. Nazdo says that was such an overwhelming defeat that he's not even upset about it, and wonders where the heck that beast came from. Iriel hurriedly shakes the collar of a nearby audience member and asks if he saw that, and says that was her little brother, as Ronan remarks that it doesn't look like he'll have to worry about anyone picking on him. He thanks the second years for the fight and says he truly learned a lot from them. He admits he went a bit overboard because he was so excited about being accepted to Filion, but he has to say that they're all much stronger than he'd imagined. He thanks them all for indulging his silly request while Maria and Acel watch, stunned. Ronan tells the second years he hopes they'll forgive his impudence today, and says he looks forward to learning more from them as he bows. Braum bursts out laughing and says he was totally wrong about Ronan, since not only is he strong, he's super polite as well. He raises Ronan's hand in victory and says there's no need to be so modest because he beat them fair and square, and should be proud of his victory. That's what Filion is all about. He cheerily winks at Ronan and says those were some incredible skills, so Ronan says he's as enthusiastic as he is talented. Surprised, Iriel happily says she can't believe how well he gets along with the other students, and says she has nothing to worry about because her little Ronan is all grown up now. Meanwhile, someone watches from afar and smilingly mutters that Ronan has piqued their curiosity. Later during dinner, Acel says when he heard there's going to be a banquet for the new students, he wasn't sure what to expect, but this place is amazing. Maria says this is the best academy in the Empire after all, and they need to show that. So Ronan agrees and says he shouldn't even be surprised at this point. Acel asks Ronan if he saw Iriel off, so he confirms that he did, but it took some time to reassure her, although she's such a worrywart, so he sent Sita with her just in case, and she shouldn't have any trouble on her way home since Sita may be small, but she's still a dragon. Acel sees that Ronan never takes any chances when it comes to his sister, so he agrees and decides to see how good Filion's food is since he's starving. However, Schlieffen suddenly appears behind him and asks if he's enjoying himself. Shocked, Ronan hurriedly gets up and asks what the heck is wrong with him. He asks Schlieffen what he's doing here and why he's picking a fight with him again, but Schlieffen says he's not here to fight him. He just wanted to check a few important matters. Ronan asks what he means by important matters, so Ronan asks where Miss Iriel lives, and if it's far from the imperial capital. He asks how the roads are on the way there, if they're well maintained, and if bandits have been known to appear there. Ronan asks him to wait a minute, but Schlieffen menacingly says he's sure Ronan assigned someone to guard her, and trusts that her sent her off with a group of mercenaries at the very least. Otherwise he's no better than a prisoner of Rodolin. Ronan hurriedly confirms that he sent someone with her. Someone way stronger than that, so unless she's attacked by a wyvern or something, she'll be fine. Shocked, Schlieffen angrily asks if he's saying she could be attacked by a wyvern and says this is terrible, but Ronan annoyingly tells him to knock it off. He asks when his sister was any of his business, and what he has to do with his sister. So Schlieffen mutters that he just wanted to make sure that a young lady got home safely, since it's his duty as a knight to ensure that. A girl walks over to them and asks what's going on over here, saying she's never seen the wolf of the Grancia family so chatty. Schlieffen sternly asks the girl, Akalusia, what she wants, as she's revealed to be Ersebet Akalusia, the first-year valedictorian of the magic department. She smilingly tells Schlieffen to not get her wrong because the only person she's interested in right now is Ronan. Ronan is surprised to hear this, but Schlieffen sighs and sees that she's found her next victim. He says his business with Ronan is done and tells Erzsebet to do as she pleases. However, he stops and says maybe he should send some guards from the Grancia family to escort Iriel just in case, but Ronan annoyingly tells him to get lost. Acel tells Ronan Erzsebet was at the magic department's student meeting earlier, so he says he knows since she was extremely powerful, almost incredibly so. Erzsebet cheerily says when someone swings their claws at you, they need to be taught a lesson, and says she's sure Ronan understands, but he says he has no idea what she's talking about and asks what she wants to do with him. She steps forward and says she was extremely impressed with his abilities in the duel, so she came here to propose something to him. Ronan asks what kind of proposal she's talking about, so she says it's something very special that ordinary people couldn't even dream of, and takes out the Akalusia invitation. Surprising Ronan. Unlike most noble families, Akalusia emphasize the importance of bloodline. The Akalusia family values talent above all else. The family has produced countless great warriors and become one of the two main pillars of the empire. Whenever they reveal themselves to someone, they usually offer the person a chance to become a member of their family. And as a symbol of that opportunity, the person is presented with an Akalusia invitation. He asks Erzsébet if she's allowed to hand those out to whoever she wants, and she says judging by his reaction, she's guessing he knows what it is. Ronan says he's just heard about it before and remembers a memory from his past life. He asks Grand Marshal Adeshan if this is an invitation and questions if even a commoner like him can become a member of the famous family as long as he has this. Adeshan confirms this and says he has to pass the family. Leaders test first, but anyone with genuine talent shouldn't have any difficulty doing so, and tells him to remember that because if his mistakes are pardoned for his military services when the war is over, he might be offered one of these invitations as well, since if you ask her, she'd say he has a lot of potential. Presently, Erzsébet tells Ronan that if he already knows what it is, that saves her the trouble of explaining, and tells him to choose wisely, since he may have been born with the talent of a wild beast. But if he stays among sheep for too long, he'll fall to their level. After she's left, Ronan annoyingly questions why all geniuses are so cocky, and inwardly admits it wouldn't hurt to establish a connection with their family. Knowing the Akalusia family, he's sure they'll be helpful to him later. At the Philion Academy, nothing is valued more highly than students' abilities. Depending on each student's grades, their school experience is radically different from others. The clearest example of that is the system of assigning dormitories based on grades. First, there's Nedia Hall, which is reserved for the bulk of medium-ranking students. The dormitory provides a very pleasant living environment, such as individual rooms for each student, and high-quality shared dining facilities. On the other hand, the bottom 30% of students are assigned to Cradier Hall. The first day at Cradier Hall begins with commotions from the students. A student annoyingly questions if they expect them to stay in this run-down old dorm when they belong to noble families, and deserve at least servants to wait on them. However, the assistant says, unfortunately, Cradier Hall doesn't have any personnel to take care of it. 4 students are assigned to every bedroom, and the dining hall, showers, and bathrooms are shared. Stunned, the students say this can't be true, but the assistant says this is the academy's policy, and there's no point in arguing about it with him, so they should just focus on their studies, otherwise they'll be staying here next semester as well. Finally, there's Neviros Hall. This dormitory is only for the top 10% of students like Ronan, and the dormitory can be summed up in one word: awesome. Stunned, Ronan questions how they can afford to give rooms like this to students, and says it's no wonder the Philion Academy is so famous. He finds some papers on a desk, and says this must be the class application form they told them about when they assigned them to dormitories earlier. He thinks he's just supposed to fill in the schedule with whatever classes he wants to take. People recommend not taking too many classes in your first year to give yourself time to adjust to the academy, but all these classes sound super interesting. In that class, he picks the classes he's interested in, and says the schedule might be a little too full, but this is Philion after all, so he wants to make the most of his time here. Later, Avar, teacher of basic imperial swordsmanship, tells Ronan that's enough and he doesn't need to take this class. Stunned, Ronan hurriedly asks what he means since he just started this class. So Avar says he's as surprised as he is since he just began this class, and yet he's already mastered all the basics of imperial swordsmanship. Ronan tries to argue, but Avar says Philion has a policy of passing students who meet all course requirements regardless of how early it may be, and if Avar keeps him in this class, he'll only end up demotivating the other students, so he shouldn't get a big head and should keep up the good work. Later, Ronan is gloomy sitting beside a river and mutters that he can't believe this. He didn't just pass out of imperial swordsmanship. The same thing happened in the applied archery class he started today, and how to slay monsters. He frustratingly questions how they could all let him pass so soon and wearily says this isn't what he expected. Someone steps towards him and says they thought they recognized the back of their head. They ask if a first year shouldn't be in class now, and Ronan turns around to see Miss Navarros. She decides to take a guess, and asks if he's feeling down because he passed his classes already, so he confirms that that's the case, and asks if classes are usually like this. He mutters that he had really high expectations for Philion, as Navarros remarks that she knows they're all first-year classes, but passing everything on the first day is pretty crazy, although she admits she shouldn't be surprised since he managed to copy her move after seeing it only once. In that case, she says as a teacher at Philion, It hurts her pride to hear him say that and tells him to give her his sword. Surprised, Ronan asks why she wants it, so she says she'll show him what kind of training he needs and takes the sword from him. He says she can't just snatch somebody's sword like that, but she suddenly fires a blast in the lake behind him, shocking him. Navarros asks if that's all the power this hunk of metal has. She tells him this isn't even a proper, and if anything, it'd holding him back so he should watch closely. She takes out her sword and swiftly slashes, creating a huge gap in the lake and showering them both. As Ronan watches in shock, Navarros asks if he sees now and sheathes her sword, saying that's what he lacks. Weapons, hunks of sharp, hard metals used to fight enemies. They're not supposed to break when you hit something with them, but if they do break, you can just get a new one. Basically, they're expendable, and that's what Ronan had thought at the very least until he saw this. Ronan remarks that he can't believe it. All that's different is the sword she's using. That was the same slash that she did with his sword, and yet it makes such a huge difference. Navarros says every breath, every ounce of strength can mean the difference between life and death in battle. Any wasted energy can cost him his life, and if he uses mana, it's more important to find the right weapon for himself. She knows all this probably hard for him to grasp right now because it appears that he doesn't know how to use mana yet. Ronan is surprised to see that she noticed, and she says she did, although she was impressed at how powerful he was, even without any mana. At any rate, she's sure he'll learn to use mana eventually and says, in order to make the most of his power, he needs a weapon made just for him since he looks like he has a lot on his mind. She suggests that he should join her class. He asks if he can do that, so she says she usually only teaches a small group of students in their second year or higher, but she'll make an exception for him. However, she wants him to find a proper weapon, not that piece of junk. That's his only requirement for taking her class. Later, Acel and Maria learn that Miss Navarros offered Ronan a spot in her class, and ask if that's why he came to the dwarven blacksmith Schlieffen told them about on his first day off. Acel asks if Schlieffen recommended this smithy to him, when he gave him that identification token, and says this isn't exactly what he had expected. Maria says that place is a total dump, and it looks like it might collapse at any moment, so she asks if this is really the smithy where the Grancia family regularly has work done. Ronan says it is, and says there's only one way to find out. They open the door and enter the building to see that it's even more of a mess on the inside. Ronan mutters that this is strange since Schlieffen doesn't seem like the kind of person who would lie. The door in front of them slowly opens, and a man asks what all this noise is, since he's trying to get some sleep. He asks who they are and what they're doing here, questioning if they can't see that the lights are off. Acel slowly asks Ronan if that's who he thinks it is, and Ronan agrees that that's something you don't see every day, a werewolf in a smithy. The werewolf annoyingly asks if they're all deaf and tells them to answer him, so Ronan shows him the identification token and says they're here to buy a weapon, questioning what else they would be doing at a smithy. He says Schlieffen recommended this place and said the weapons here are top-notch. The werewolf is surprised to see that they have a Grancia family identification token, and asks if he thinks that carrying that thing around makes him a member of the Grancia family. He yawns, saying he doesn't know how Schlieffen found out about this place, but he should get lost since they don't accept customers like him. Ronan tells him to hold on and says that's ridiculous, but the werewolf says on second thought, he just had an idea. He points to Acel, saying that little guy looks nice and tender, so if Ronan tears off one of his arms for him, he might consider helping him. He menacingly says he's feeling kind of hungry, so he'll do him a favor. Acel hurriedly says he's not tasty at all, but Ronan angrily glares at the werewolf and tells him he just crossed the line before smacking him with the sword. As the wolf is thrown back, he shockingly wonders what the hell just happened. Ronan says he knew he felt something weird when he stabbed him, and this explains it. He asks the werewolf where the armor he's wearing came from, but says it doesn't matter since he'll just smash through it anyway. However, the werewolf suddenly asks him to hold on and says he was just testing them, explaining that whenever a stranger shows up here, they have to test their abilities first. On top of that, he wanted to try out this invisible armor as well, so he provoked them on purpose and never really meant to hurt them. Ronan says that's a creative excuse and asks if he really expects them to believe that, so the werewolf tells him to think about it. The Grancia family are regular customers here, and it wouldn't make sense for them to accept anyone who walks in here off the street, so if he doesn't believe him, he can just ask Schlieffen later. Ronan says this whole verification process seems to him like a good way to get oneself killed. The werewolf says it certainly comes with risks, although it was his own fault for taking it too far this time. Anyway, he cheerily apologizes to Acel for behavior and if he made him uncomfortable. He tells him to not worry, because he doesn't eat people, so Acel smilingly says, "That's good to know." The werewolf introduces himself as Didikan and says he works as an apprentice here and sometimes acts as a gatekeeper as well. Ronan introduces himself, so Didikan asks if he came to buy a weapon, and tells him to follow him. since this is only the entrance to their business, the real smithy is this way. They enter an empty room, and once everyone is settled, Didikan tells them to brace themselves and presses a brick, saying they're about to see something extraordinary. The floor beneath them slowly starts descending, and Didikan says it's a lift made with mana stones and a pulley. This is the quickest way to reach the main smithy, and this here is the greatest and largest smithy in the imperial capital called Grand Cappadocia. Ronan can't believe there's a place like this underground, so Didikan tells him to just wait and says, since he passed his test, he's going to make sure they get him set up with something very good, and for that, they're going to see the greatest blacksmith not only in Grand Cappadocia, but in the whole imperial capital. Ronan still can't believe there's such a massive smithy under the imperial capital, and says he never imagined such a thing. Didikan says they obviously didn't know, they only served the royal family and a small number of distinguished clients after all. He says they've gathered all the best craftsmen here, regardless of race or status, but without a doubt the greatest one of all is the old dwarf who lives here, who's been in this line of work for 400 years. He can be a bit uptight at times because he's so OD, but his abilities as a smithy are unrivaled. That's why he respects him. He kicks open a door and asks an old man what he's up to, saying he brought him a customer. A dwarf asks if that's Didikan, since only he would barge in here like that. He says he told him not to disturb him while he's working, but he never listens. Didikan asks what choice he had, and says there was a pile of weapons blocking the door so it wouldn't open. He tells the dwarf. Doran, he keeps telling him to clean this place up, but Doran asks if he'll quit his nagging. Anyway, he sees that Didikan's brought him a customer and asks if he's any good. Didikan says he certainly is since he tested him himself, and tells Doran he won't believe how good he is with a sword, believing that even he'd be amazed. Doran is surprised to hear this since, judging by his appearance at least, he looks like a pretty regular kid. All right then. He tells Ronan to show him the sword he's been using since he can tell a lot by looking at it. Ronan takes it out and Doran says it's a piece of junk before instantly breaking it with his hammer, questioning if he really calls this thing a weapon. Ronan annoyingly asks Doran what he thinks he's doing, but Doran points him to the pile of weapons lying on the ground and tells him to go ahead and try out any sword he likes, since he can't assess his skills properly if he's using a piece of scrap metal for a sword, and he can keep whatever sword he chooses for free, so he shouldn't be so upset about his old one, since whatever sword he picks will be 100 times better than that piece of garbage. Ronan asks if he really means that, and glances at Didikan, who nods appreciatively. Ronan agrees and picks one up, remarking that the grip definitely feels different, but he wonders if there's really that much of a difference. He asks Doran if he's sure about this, and tells him to not blame him if anything breaks, so Doran tells him to not worry. It doesn't matter if he breaks anything, he should just give it his best shot and show him the strongest technique that he knows. In that case, Ronan decides to use the technique Navaros showed him. Seeing his stance, Doran realizes he can recognize those moves and wonders if it can really be that as Ronan slashes, destroying a wall, while the other blacksmiths outside question what's going on, and if a blast furnace exploded. Stunned, Ronan wonders what just happened, and says he didn't mean to do that. Doran says he knows that sword technique. Navaros uses it and asks if he's her student. Ronan is surprised to hear that he knows Navaros, so Doran reveals that he's the one who made that sword for her. Surprised, Ronan asks if he means that long sword of her, so Doran confirms that that's it, and says it's the legendary blade Ursa, one of the greatest masterpieces he's ever created in his many years as a blacksmith. Compared to that, the one he's holding is practically a fireplace poker, but he asks Ronan what he thinks and if he likes it. Ronan confirms that it's definitely a good sword, but he didn't really expect much, to be honest. Doran smirks, and says he took the words right out of his mouth since he'd thought Ronan was just some little punk who doesn't know what he's doing, but he hasn't seen talent like his in ages. However, sometimes being too talented comes with its own problems. It won't be easy to make a sword for him, especially seeing that not even that one is strong enough. Ronan asks what he should do in that case, so Doran says ordinary materials are too weak, and he'll need to mix a special material with top-quality steel. It'll have to be at least as sturdy as a wyvern byproduct. Ronan asks if this will work, saying he brought it with him just in case, and Doran is surprised to see a broken eggshell in his hand. Later, Doran mutters that he can't believe it. He's pounding the eggshell with a mithril hammer, and yet he still can't make a dent in it. He questions what in the world this shell is made of, and asks Ronan if he's sure it's okay for him to use such a precious material. Ronan says it's fine since he wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. He asks Doran if he thinks that'll be enough to make a sword for him, so Doran cheerily confirms this and tells him to come back in a couple of weeks since he'll prepare the greatest sword in the imperial capital for him by then. Ronan says he looks forward to seeing it, and Doran tells Maria and Acel to go and stop by another blacksmith while they're here. Maria is surprised to hear that he means them, so Doran says he can't send away friends of a VIP customer empty-handed. He says if they tell the blacksmiths he sent them, they'll make them something good. He says he'd like to make them something himself, but he's a little preoccupied at the moment since all he can think about right now is smelting this eggshell. He happily says that ring is a beautiful sound as he's working, and Ronan remarks that there's definitely something wrong with that guy. Meanwhile, a woman annoyingly says all the noise they're making is really starting to get on her nerves. A guy says he wishes he could go up there and burn the whole smithy to the ground right now, but the woman tells him to control himself, since it's not yet the right time to reveal themselves, but it won't be long now. Those blacksmiths' days are numbered, and very soon this whole empire will vanish in a burst of starlight. A few days later, as Ronan is walking, he remarks that the best blacksmith in the empire offered to make him a sword himself. Asel and Maria ask the craftsman there to make them custom-made items as well, and it will probably cost a small fortune, but that's none of his concern because it's not his money, and he's using the Garcia family's token. The only problem is that it takes 2 weeks to finish the new sword, so he wearily wonders what he's going to do in the meantime, since Asel and Maria are probably in class now. He suddenly stops, realizing where he is, and sees that this is where the top students study, Galerian Hall. He believes Miss Navarros probably teaches her class in this hall. He's been putting off going to see her because she told him to come back with a real weapon, but the smithy did give him a temporary sword to use, so maybe he should stop by today. He suddenly realizes Miss Navarros is menacingly standing beside him and slowly turns around to face her, but she suddenly grabs him by the ear, saying it's been a while. She angrily says she told him to attend her class as soon as he got a new weapon, but asks what took him so long to come here. She asks if he's been messing around, but he hurriedly says he hasn't and can explain everything. However, she keeps holding him by the ear and tells him to just come with her, saying he can tell her his excuses on the way. He hurriedly agrees, but asks her at least let go of him since that hurts. Meanwhile, a girl wonders what that noise was since she heard someone shouting. A guy crashes into her and annoyingly tells her to get out of the way as the papers she was carrying fall out of her hands. She apologizes to Carden and admits she was distracted, but he questions how she can call herself a teaching assistant and tells her to hurry up and prepare for class instead of standing around, daydreaming, so she agrees and says she'll be there soon. In the first sparring arena, Navarros takes Ronan to meet her other students, saying she's sure some of them already know him since he made such a big splash at the student meeting. However, she'll introduce him once more anyway. This is Ronan, and he'll be joining their class as of today. Ronan bows and introduces himself as a first-year martial arts student, saying it's nice to meet them all. The students gossip about how that kid is the first-year salutatorian, and believe they must have let him skip a grade. They wonder if he's really that strong since he looks kind of prissy, to be honest, so Ronan annoyingly remarks that he can hear them all but sees that there are at least some friendly faces, although he's not so happy to see Schlieffen. Oh well, he's sure this will be interesting, but a girl suddenly bursts in and apologizes for being late. She tells Navarros she was busy taking care of the urgent work she had assigned to her, and Ronan recognizes that voice. The girl hopes she didn't keep Navarros waiting for too long, but Navarros says it's all right and tells her to try to catch her breath, saying she just finished introducing the newest student. The girl asks if she means the famous first-year boy she mentioned before, so Navarros tells her to go ahead and introduce herself to him, since he should know the name of her teaching assistant. The girl agrees and tells Ronan it's nice to meet him, introducing herself as Ada Shan, a second-year student in the martial arts department acting as the teaching assistant for this class. She offers him a hand and pleasantly says she looks forward to working together in this class, as Ronan shockingly realizes she's Grand Marshal Adeshan. Adeshan Akalusia, renowned for her exceptional leadership abilities. She was the first woman to be promoted to the position of Grand Marshal. She commands her troops in battle with level-headed judgment and brilliant leadership. They call her the Iron Lady. Those who have experienced her leadership describe her as follows. Adeshan has iron running through her veins instead of blood. Ronan remarks that that's why this is so surprising. He never imagined he would see the Grand Marshal smile like this. She clearly doesn't remember anything about her previous life. He wonders if that's what she looked like when she was younger, and what he should do about the favor she asked him to do for her. He annoyingly says that's a lot of responsibility to put on him. But on another note, he wonders why Adeshan is so busy, as she quickly darts around the room. She even does the kind of chores that would usually be given to servants, so is that normal for a teaching assistant? A student says Ronan looks bored and suggests that they can spar together. Ronan asks if he wants to spar with him, so the guy cheerily says he didn't mean to surprise him, and introduces himself as Cardinaun, a third-year student. He says he's heard a lot about how impressive Ronan was in the student meeting and says, if the rumors are true, he'd really like to take this opportunity to learn from him. Ronan says he has something else on his mind at the moment and is about to suggest that they could maybe spar later, but Carden realizes he totally forgot to bring his weapon over here. He calls out to Adeshan and tells her to bring him his practice spear, referring to her as dummy. Adeshan agrees and says she'll be right there, as Ronan angrily realizes he just called her dummy, and inwardly questions if he just called the Grand Marshal a dummy. Adeshan hands Carden the spear, but he questions what this is and angrily calls her a fool, questioning why she brought him a long spear when he switched to a javelin ages ago. Adeshan realizes that's right, and hurriedly apologizes since she'd thought she remembered him using a long spear last time. Carden asks what was that, and asks if she just talked back to him. He smacks her on the head with the spear, and angrily asks what kind of idiot can't even tell a long spear and a javelin apart. He angrily says she doesn't deserve to take this class, and keeps repeatedly smacking her on the head. Adeshan doesn't resist, as Carden says Miss Navarros only lets her join because she begged her, so the least she can do is not screw up the most basic tasks. He questions if she has no shame or if she just doesn't care, so Adeshan apologizes and says she'll try to be more careful. As he's smacking her, Ronan angrily grabs the spear. Carden asks what he's doing and why he just grabbed the spear, but Ronan suddenly tells Carden they should do it, otherwise there's no telling what he might do. Carden asks what he means, and says he has no idea what he's talking about, so Ronan angrily clenches the spear even more tightly and asks if he's deaf. He said he wants to spar with him and calls him a moron. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the recap, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all next time.